Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're digging into ARGX and their massive Q2 2026 update. We're going to take what look like pretty dense biopharma financials and translate them into a wild story of commercial momentum and, more importantly, real human impact. It's a fascinating look at a company that is literally trying to rewrite the rulebook on severe autoimmune disease. Here's our roadmap for today. We'll start with their Vision 2030, then hit those explosive Q2 results. From there, we'll look at how VYVGART is dominating GMG, their push to reach new autoimmune patients, and finally, how they're expanding that massive immunology pipeline.
All right, part 1, Vision 2030 and long-term growth.
So this is their 50K 10-5 strategy. We're talking 50,000 patients on treatment across 10 labeled indications, all fueled by 5 late-stage molecules by 2030. You know what's really interesting here? Their main public metric for long-term growth isn't actually a dollar sign. It's heavily anchored on human lives and diversifying that immunology portfolio.
But to really get the math, we have to understand the biology. Argenx is going after these incredibly complex, severe autoimmune diseases where, historically, the treatment pipeline has just been a total ghost town. Seriously, conditions with 0 approved therapies. And that is exactly what makes their biological focus so potent.
Moving on to part 2, explosive Q2 financial results. $1.516 billion. Let that sink in. That is their total global product net sales for just the second quarter of 2026 alone. They are operating at this massive, multi-blockbuster scale, pulling in incredible revenue in a really tight window.
But honestly, it's the velocity behind that billion-dollar figure that's the real jaw-dropper. 60% year-over-year operational growth. I mean, scaling an organization to $1.5 billion a quarter is kind of like trying to build an airplane mid-flight, right? Doing it while growing at 60% shows an incredibly rare level of market adoption. And this growth is exploding everywhere you look. The US is obviously the powerhouse here, pulling in $1.2 billion, up 59%. But Japan? Japan is the real surprise, up 117% year over year, casually crossing that $100 million mark. This global footprint drove a Q2 operating profit of nearly $500 million. Now, I know it's super easy to get lost in all these financial tables, but we have to remember that those revenue numbers ultimately represent human lives. Look at this reaction from an MG patient named Mary Beth. It totally grounds the conversation. When a rare disease company hits $1 billion in sales, it literally means they are fundamentally altering reality for patients who previously had very little hope. Okay, part 3, VYVGART and how it's absolutely dominating GMG.
So the engine driving this whole thing is a major label expansion. VYVG is now the first and only targeted treatment for adults with GMG across all serotypes. By covering both anti-AChR and anti-MuSK positive patients, VYVG has secured the broadest label in the entire space. It basically gives doctors this unified go-to tool for earlier line use. And if you're wondering why adoption has been so incredibly fast, just look at the historical disease burden. 60% of patients progress despite traditional treatments, and shockingly, 40% are initially misdiagnosed, often confused with devastating terminal conditions like ALS. It perfectly explains why a highly targeted biological approach is capturing the market so completely right now. Which brings us to part 4, reaching new autoimmune patients.
42,000. That is the total addressable market of diagnosed patients right at launch for their next massive target, CIDP. This represents a huge, entirely new frontier for the company.
But you see, the real opportunity is hidden in the gap here. Right now, only about 12,000 of those patients are considered well-managed on current treatments, like IVIG. So that leaves roughly 18,000 diagnosed patients who are currently just sitting there, completely untreated. Argenx isn't just out to steal market share. They're aiming to expand the entire pool of treated patients. And as they're busy capturing these massive new neurology markets, they're quietly, simultaneously building this highly diversified immunology portfolio in the background. The goal? To make sure this explosive growth sustains well past the end of the decade.
All right, final section, part 5, expanding the immunology pipeline.
Look, rather than getting totally lost in a biotech alphabet soup of drug codes and trial numbers, let's just step back and look at the sheer breadth of what they're doing. They're pushing way out of neurology and aggressively expanding into rheumatology, renal diseases, and severe skin targets. It's a brilliant way to diversify their scientific risk. And the speed of all this is just relentless. They've got 25 active programs running,
with a stated target of pushing out one investigational new drug application every single year. Let me tell you, in the biotech world, having that kind of predictable annual flow of new clinical drugs is an incredibly aggressive pace.
We also aren't going to have to wait long for the next big catalyst. Q3 2026 brings a registrational study readout for autoimmune myositis. This is a critical test of VivaGuard's expansion into the massively lucrative rheumatology space.
So I want to leave you with this final thought. ARGX ended Q2 with $5.2 billion in cash, 60% operational growth, and 25 active clinical programs. When you have a literal war chest of that size funding such a massive pipeline, the question isn't just about how many diseases they can treat. It's really whether Argenx is redefining the upper limits of what a biopharma growth curve can truly look like. Thanks for joining this explainer, and we'll catch you next time.